The criminal charges carried 15 years in prison, but Marcus Chen was organizing evidence like he'd already won. His fingers moved with surgical precision through manila folders, each labeled with timestamps and cross-referenced notes. The court documents lay folded in his shirt pocket, right next to a school custodian badge that everyone assumed told his whole story. They were wrong about everything. Outside his apartment window, the third news van of the day positioned its satellite dish. Inside, his 12-year-old son practiced navigation techniques with a white cane, the gentle tap-tap-tap echoing off walls like a heartbeat. The vanilla scent of hand lotion still clung to Marcus's fingers, not his own, but from an 8-year-old girl whose breakthrough had triggered this nightmare. A millionaire CEO had declared war on a janitor. The community had chosen sides before hearing evidence. Police had opened an investigation without checking credentials that would shock everyone. But Marcus had exactly 72 hours to prove his innocence, or watch his son lose the only parent he had left. The accusation had exploded across every screen in the city within hours. Sarah Mitchell, CEO of tech giant Innovate Solutions, stood on the courthouse steps like an avenging angel, her voice shaking with righteous fury as cameras captured every word. "This man approached my blind daughter under the guise of helping," she'd announced, her hand protective on 8-year-old Emma's shoulder. "What I discovered was inappropriate physical contact disguised as mobility training. No parent should have to fear predators wearing the mask of kindness." The video went viral in 6 hours. 50,000 views became 100,000. Comments flooded in with outrage and demands for justice. Parents shared the clip with warnings about grooming tactics and suspicious behavior. The hashtag #ProtectYourChildren began trending. Emma Mitchell stood silent beside her mother throughout the press conference, white cane folded in hands that hadn't stopped trembling since the accusations began, the same hands that had been learning to trace walls and navigate hallways with growing confidence just days before. By sunset, Marcus Chen's life had been systematically dismantled, suspended without pay, banned from all school property, keys confiscated, name added to every parent notification system in the district. The local news anchor used his employee photo beside words like inappropriate contact and vulnerable child. The community's verdict came swift as execution. Former colleagues crossed streets to avoid him. Neighbors who'd waved for 3 years now pulled curtains shut when he passed. Parents who'd once thanked him for helping their struggling children now whispered warnings about that dangerous man who works around kids. The school district's emergency blast email had been brutal in its clarity. Marcus Chen is prohibited from all campus facilities pending investigation of serious allegations involving inappropriate conduct with a disabled student. The message included his photo and a hotline number for additional concerns. But in his apartment, sealed inside a fireproof safe, documents waited that would rewrite everything. Professional certifications that nobody had thought to verify, training credentials that explained every technique he'd used, business cards that revealed expertise no predator would ever possess, a lifetime of specialized knowledge reduced to suspicion because he'd chosen to work quietly among children who needed help most. His phone buzzed constantly with unknown numbers, reporters seeking statements, lawyers offering services, anonymous callers hurling accusations. He'd stopped answering after the death threats began. Instead, he methodically organized evidence with the patience of someone who understood that truth had its own timeline. Audio recordings properly labeled and time-stamped, security footage that told a story nobody had bothered to watch, progress reports that documented breakthrough moments in scientific detail, professional correspondence that would make the accusations look not just false, but impossibly ignorant. The school board meeting loomed Thursday evening, 72 hours away. Emergency session, packed auditorium, live media coverage. Sarah Mitchell's legal team had filed for a permanent restraining order. Disability rights advocates demanded speaking time. The district faced a public relations nightmare that threatened funding and reputation. And Marcus Chen had prepared a defense that would leave everyone speechless. In his living room, David continued practicing with quiet determination, his white cane tapping patterns that his father had taught him years ago. The same techniques now being called inappropriate contact, the same gentle guidance now labeled as predatory behavior. "Dad?" David called softly, his voice carrying the careful precision of someone who'd learned to navigate by sound. "The people on TV don't understand what you do they? Marcus folded another document with hands that hadn't shaken once since the nightmare began, because he knew something the mob didn't, something that would transform their judgment into something else entirely. The truth was hidden in plain sight, waiting for its moment to destroy every assumption they'd made about the quiet custodian who'd been changing lives one child at a time. The truth was hidden in plain sight, and it began every morning at 5:47 a.m. with the sound of David's inhaler. Marcus moved through their morning routine with the precision of someone who'd learned that consistency meant survival. Medication chart on the refrigerator, color-coded by dosage times. Breakfast portions measured for David's dietary restrictions. School supplies arranged in the exact same spot on the kitchen counter where small fingers could find them without searching. The refrigerator hummed softly as Marcus pulled out David's lunch, already prepared the night before. Turkey sandwich cut diagonally, never straight across because the triangular shape helped David identify which corner to start eating. Apple slices in a container that clicked when opened, giving audio confirmation of freshness. A note written in Braille that said, "You're brave, you're smart, you're loved." David appeared in the kitchen doorway, white cane tapping a familiar pattern against the threshold. His school uniform was pressed, shoes tied in the double knot technique that prevented them from coming loose during navigation practice. At 12, he moved through their apartment with confidence that amazed social workers and broke his father's heart with pride. "Dad, Mrs. Peterson called last night," David said, settling into his chair with the careful precision of someone who'd memorized the exact distance from wall to table. "She said I can't come to after-school program anymore." Mrs. Peterson had run the adaptive learning program for 3 years. Her call had been brief, apologetic, devastating. "I'm sorry, Marcus, but the parents are concerned about the situation." The same program that had become David's safe haven was now another door slammed shut. How many more children would lose their safe haven? Marcus's hand stilled on the lunch preparation. Aunt Jennifer lived 40 minutes away and worked double shifts. The after-school program had been David's bridge to independence, a place where children with disabilities learned skills and built friendships without judgment. Now even that sanctuary was being stripped away. The kitchen fell quiet except for the soft whir of the coffee maker and David's fingers reading his Braille homework. Marcus watched his son's face, searching for signs of the anxiety that had plagued David after the accident that took both his mother and his sight. Every routine disruption had once triggered panic attacks that left them both exhausted. "The people on TV don't know about my cane lessons, do they?" David asked quietly. For 3 years, Marcus had taught David navigation techniques that no therapist had achieved: sound mapping, terrain recognition, confidence building through systematic exposure, the same methods he'd used to help Emma Mitchell take her first independent steps through a school hallway. The certification documents could save them, if anyone bothered to look. On the kitchen counter, past due medical bills formed a neat stack beside therapy invoices that insurance refused to cover. David's specialized equipment cost more than Marcus's monthly salary. The orientation and mobility sessions that David needed, the ones that actually worked, ran $300 each with a 6-month waiting list, unless you knew how to provide them yourself. Hidden in the bedroom closet, professional journals waited alongside research papers on adaptive navigation techniques, training manuals for orientation and mobility specialists. Certification requirements that Marcus had met years before the accident forced him to choose between credentials and custody, between professional recognition and being present for his son. The custodial job paid enough to keep them housed and fed. More importantly, it kept him close to children who needed the same help David had received. Children whose parents couldn't afford private specialists. Children whose school districts couldn't provide adequate services. Children like Emma Mitchell, whose mother's wealth couldn't buy the breakthrough that only patience and proper training could achieve. His phone buzzed with another unknown number, another reporter, another parent demanding answers, another person who'd decided his guilt without checking the credentials hidden in their fireproof safe. But would those credentials matter when mob justice had already chosen sides? Marcus silenced the phone and focused on David's morning routine. Help with buttons that challenged fine motor skills, double-check the school bag contents, review the day's schedule so David could prepare for any routine changes. "Will you teach me more sound mapping tonight?" David asked, shouldering his backpack with practiced ease. Marcus watched his son navigate to the front door, white cane tapping confident rhythms against familiar floorboards. Every step represented hours of patient training. Every confident movement proved that proper techniques, applied with genuine care, could transform a child's world. In the filing cabinet, sealed documents waited that could vindicate everything. Professional certifications that explained every technique, training records that proved expertise, business correspondence that revealed the truth about who Marcus Chen really was. Always, Marcus said, though he wondered how many more nights they'd have together. David reached for the door handle with the precision of someone who'd learned independence through necessity. His movements carried no fear, no hesitation, only the confidence his father had carefully built over 3 years of patient instruction. In 71 hours, a school board would decide whether that instruction was professional expertise or criminal behavior. 71 hours before David's world might shatter too, but Sarah Mitchell's empire was already cracking. The stock ticker on her dual monitors painted a picture of corporate hemorrhaging. Innovate Solutions had dropped 12% since the press conference, wiping out $48 million in market value. Institutional investors were requesting clarification calls. The IPO roadshow, scheduled to begin Monday, hung by threads that frayed with each news cycle. Sarah's corner office on the 32nd floor offered a view of the city that usually calmed her. Not today. Her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows looked like a woman who hadn't slept in 48 hours. Because she hadn't, Emma sat at the small table by the window, Braille homework spread before her like a tactical map. Her daughter's fingers moved across the raised dots with growing confidence, the same confidence that had triggered this nightmare. Each fluid movement reminded Sarah of techniques no 8-year-old should have learned from a school custodian. "Mommy, why can't I go to school today?" Emma asked, not looking up from her work. Sarah's throat tightened. The school district had offered alternative arrangements until the situation resolved. Code 4, keep your daughter away while we handle the scandal. Emma had spent 2 days at home while attorneys drafted motions and reporters camped outside their house. The board meeting Thursday would determine everything, including whether Sarah's protective instincts had destroyed the wrong person. Her assistant knocked twice, their signal for urgent calls. "Mrs. Mitchell, Goldman Sachs on line 1. Sarah lifted the receiver with hands that hadn't stopped trembling since the press conference. "Jonathan." "Sarah, we need to talk." The investment banker's voice carried the clinical detachment of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. "The IPO committee has concerns about leadership stability. Current events are complicating investor confidence." Through her office window, Sarah watched construction crews working on the building across the street. Normal people doing normal jobs while her empire crumbled over 8 words. "Inappropriate physical contact with my blind daughter." "How long do we have?" she asked. "The roadshow begins Monday. If this isn't resolved by Thursday's board meeting." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. $2 billion in valuations didn't survive sex scandals, especially ones involving disabled children and protective mothers who might have been wrong. Could a mother's protective instincts destroy $2 billion? Sarah ended the call and opened the file her private investigator had delivered that morning. She'd ordered the background check on Marcus Chen within hours of filing the police report, standard procedure for litigation. The sealed envelope sat unopened on her desk, its contents waiting like a bomb that might explode her assumptions. But looking meant admitting doubt, and doubt meant Emma might have been learning from someone qualified all along. The framed photo on her desk showed Emma's first successful mobility lesson 3 years ago. A different instructor, Dr. Patricia Williams, the orientation and mobility specialist who'd cost $800 per session and achieved minimal progress in 6 months. Emma had been timid, dependent, afraid to move beyond familiar spaces. That same little girl now navigated their penthouse apartment with growing independence, using techniques she'd learned in 3 weeks from a man Sarah had branded a predator. "Mommy," Emma called softly, "Mr. James taught me to count steps and listen for echoes." Was that bad touching? Sarah's chest constricted. Emma's question carried the confusion of a child whose breakthrough was being labeled as trauma. The same techniques that had given Emma confidence were now being investigated as grooming behaviors. The private investigator's envelope felt heavier each time Sarah looked at it. Inside were answers she wasn't sure she wanted to find. Professional background, education records, employment history, character references. information that might prove Marcus Chen wasn't the monster she'd painted him to be. Her phone buzzed with a text from her ex-husband. "Saw the news. Finally found someone worse than me." The message stung because Robert had abandoned them 6 months after Emma's diagnosis, claiming he couldn't handle a broken child. His definition of protection had been running away. Sarah had sworn no man would hurt Emma again. That promise had driven every decision since the divorce, including the one that might have destroyed an innocent father's life. The legal brief from her attorney lay open on the desk, outlining the case against Marcus Chen. Inappropriate physical contact during unsupervised mobility training. The language was clinical, damning, effective. It would convince any jury that couldn't see Emma's growing confidence or hear her questions about sound mapping and audio landmarks. Technical terms that suggested professional knowledge, not predatory behavior. But admitting that meant admitting she'd been wrong about everything. Thursday's board meeting would determine Marcus Chen's fate, but Wednesday's IPO decision would determine hers. 2 parents, 2 children, 2 careers, all balanced on the edge of truth she might not be ready to face. Sarah's hand hovered over the private investigator's envelope for the 3rd time that hour. What if protecting Emma meant admitting a terrible mistake, but it was already too late to stop the avalanche? The Channel 7 news truck arrived at Marcus's apartment complex at dawn Wednesday, followed by Channel 4, then Channel 12. By noon, satellite dishes sprouted from the parking lot like mechanical flowers feeding on scandal. Custodian accused of inappropriate contact with disabled student scrolled across every local screen in the city. Reporter Jessica Kim positioned herself outside the building's entrance, her voice carrying the breathless excitement of someone who'd found a story with legs. "We're live outside the home of Marcus Chen, the school custodian accused of grooming an 8-year-old blind girl. Sources tell us the investigation has uncovered a pattern of unsupervised contact with vulnerable children. There was no pattern. There were no sources. But truth moved slower than headlines." Marcus watched from his living room window as neighbors he'd known for 3 years gathered on sidewalks to point and whisper. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd always waved when he helped David to the school bus, now pulled her grandchildren inside when she saw him. Mr. Thompson, who'd borrowed tools and shared weekend coffee, crossed the street with deliberate steps that spoke louder than words. David sat at the kitchen table, Braille homework forgotten, his head tilted toward the sounds of crowds gathering outside their home. "Dad, why are there so many people?" Marcus closed the blinds with hands that refused to shake. "They're confused about something. It'll pass." But even as he said it, his phone buzzed with the notification that would change everything. Breaking, State Licensing Board opens emergency investigation into Marcus Chen's professional credentials. The mob had found his real story and twisted it into something unrecognizable. By afternoon, the narrative had crystallized across every platform. Social media exploded with outrage and demands for justice. #ProtectYourChildren trended alongside #School Safety. Parent groups shared the story with warnings about predators hiding in plain sight. The comments section under Channel 7's Facebook post told the story of mob justice in real time. How did the school not know about this man's background? My daughter goes to that school. I'm keeping her home tomorrow. Someone needs to check every adult who works around our kids. Why wasn't he properly vetted? The irony would have been funny if it weren't destroying his life. They were demanding background checks that would have vindicated him completely. Principal Henderson's call came at 3:47 p.m., her voice tight with administrative panic. "Marcus, I'm sorry, but the district's legal team has advised us to suspend your custodial contract pending resolution. The school board meets tomorrow to make this official." "What about references?" Marcus asked quietly. "Did anyone call Dr. Williams about my work with Emma?" Silence stretched across the phone line like a chasm. "We're following protocol," Henderson said finally. "The investigation is ongoing." Protocol meant guilty until proven innocent when children and blind girls and protective mothers were involved. The state licensing board's website crashed from traffic as reporters tried to access Marcus's professional records. The irony was perfect. The very credentials that would exonerate him were now being investigated as evidence of deception. Headlines screamed about custodians with hidden qualifications and unvetted adults in schools. By evening, the story had grown legs and started running. Cable news picked up the local coverage. School safety crisis became the chyron on 3 networks. Parent advocacy groups issued statements. Child protection organizations demanded policy reviews. And Emma Mitchell, the center of it all, sat in her penthouse apartment asking her mother why she couldn't see Mr. James anymore. The petition started on change.org at 6:23 p.m. Remove Marcus Chen from all school property permanently. By midnight, it had gathered 1,247 signatures from parents who'd never met him, never seen his work, never checked his credentials. Digital democracy in action, swift, decisive, and completely divorced from evidence. The comments attached to signatures told the story of a community that had already reached its verdict. Our children deserve better protection. Zero tolerance for predators in schools. Fire him and ban him from all school grounds. How many other children has he groomed? Marcus read each signature like a death sentence. Teachers who'd worked alongside him for 3 years. Parents whose children he'd helped find lost homework. Neighbors who'd borrowed tools and shared holiday greetings. All convinced he was something he'd never been, because truth took longer to organize than outrage took to spread. David emerged from his bedroom at 11:47 p.m., white cane tapping against the hallway walls. "Dad, I can hear people outside talking about us. Are we in trouble?" Marcus pulled his son close, feeling the rapid heartbeat of a 12-year-old boy whose world was collapsing around him. Outside, news vans maintained their vigil. Tomorrow, the school board would meet to decide their fate. And somewhere across the city, Sarah Mitchell was probably reading the same petition, watching the same coverage, convinced she was protecting her daughter from a monster. The truth sat in a fireproof safe 20 feet away, but nobody had asked to see it. While everyone planned his destruction, he was planning something else entirely, and it started with a call to his attorney at midnight. "Marcus, I need to be clear about something," Attorney Rebecca Santos said, her voice carrying the weight of 20 years in family law. "What you're proposing is legal, but it's also risky. Once you reveal your professional credentials publicly, there's no controlling the narrative." Marcus sat in his kitchen, David's mobility equipment spread across the table, like evidence in a trial that hadn't started yet. Audio recordings, progress journals, certification documents, professional correspondence that told the story of who he really was. "The Good Samaritan statutes protect emergency assistance," Rebecca continued. "Your orientation and mobility certification gives you legal authority to provide adaptive services. But the court of public opinion doesn't follow legal precedent." Marcus picked up one of David's textured grip pencils, running his thumb across the adaptive surface that helped small fingers maintain control. The same technology he'd recommended for Emma Mitchell, the same techniques that were now being called grooming. But the law was clear. Qualified professionals could provide emergency assistance to children in need. "I need them to see the truth," Marcus said quietly. "All of it." The documentation was overwhelming once organized properly. Master's degree in orientation and mobility from San Francisco State University, graduated summa cum laude. State certification from the Academy for Certification of Vision Rehabilitation Therapy Professionals. 15 years of experience working with children who had visual impairments, professional memberships in 3 national organizations, continuing education credits that exceeded requirements. Letters of recommendation from supervisors, colleagues, and grateful parents whose children had achieved independence through his guidance, the kind of credentials that explained every technique he'd used with Emma Mitchell and made the accusations look not just false but impossibly ignorant. Thursday morning, Marcus drove David to school through streets lined with protesters holding signs, "Protect our children," and "Zero tolerance for predators." The irony was perfect. They were protesting the very expertise their children needed. "Dad," David said as they pulled into the school parking lot, "will you still be able to help other kids like me?" Marcus watched his son gather his backpack and white cane with the confidence that 3 years of proper training had built. Every movement represented techniques that certified professionals used worldwide. Every confident step proved that appropriate intervention could transform a child's entire future. "Always," Marcus said, though he wondered if society would let him. The first breakthrough came during Emma Mitchell's therapy session with Dr. Patricia Williams, the expensive specialist whose 6 months of traditional training had achieved minimal progress. Emma demonstrated the sound mapping techniques Marcus had taught her, navigating the unfamiliar therapy office with confidence that stunned the professional who'd been working with her for months. "Emma, where did you learn to use audio landmarks like that?" "Doctor," Williams asked, her voice carrying professional amazement, "Mr. James taught me to listen for echoes and count steps." Emma replied, her white cane tapping precise patterns against the office floor. "He said walls talk if you know how to hear them." Dr. Williams documented the session with growing concern, not about inappropriate contact, but about the sophisticated techniques a school custodian had somehow mastered. Sound mapping was graduate-level orientation and mobility training, the kind of expertise that required years of specialized education, the kind of expertise that suggested Marcus Chen wasn't just a custodian. Her report would be filed within hours, but the damage was already spreading faster than truth could follow. At Innovate Solutions, Sarah Mitchell's private investigator finally delivered his complete report. The sealed envelope contained 3 years of meticulous background research, employment history, educational transcripts, professional certifications, character references, everything Sarah needed to know about the man she'd accused of grooming her daughter. But opening it meant confronting the possibility that her protective instincts had targeted the wrong person entirely. The envelope sat unopened on her desk as stock prices continued falling and IPO investors demanded answers. Outside her office window, construction workers operated with the confidence of people who knew exactly what they were building. Unlike Sarah, who was beginning to suspect she'd been tearing down something precious, Emma's questions grew more specific each day. "Mommy, Mr. James taught me about sound shadows. Is that bad? And why can't I practice audio landmarks anymore?" The technical terminology troubled Sarah because it suggested professional knowledge, not predatory behavior. Knowledge that an expensive specialist had failed to provide in 6 months of traditional therapy. The school board meeting loomed 6 hours away. Marcus Chen would have his chance to speak, to defend himself, to present evidence that might change everything. But Sarah's attorneys had already filed motions for a permanent restraining order, and mob justice rarely reversed course once momentum built. Still, doubt crept in like morning light through curtains she'd pulled tight against truth. Her daughter was demonstrating navigation skills that suggested expertise, not exploitation. The man she'd branded a predator had somehow given Emma the independence that wealth couldn't buy and traditional therapy couldn't achieve. What if she'd been wrong about everything? The thought terrified her more than any stockholder meeting or media interview, because being wrong meant Emma had lost the one person who'd actually helped her grow, and Sarah had destroyed an innocent father's life in the process. 6 hours until truth faced justice in a packed auditorium. The sealed envelope waited like Pandora's box, containing answers that might set everyone free or confirm that some mistakes were too big to take back. 6 hours until truth faced justice in a packed auditorium. But first, a father had to prepare his son for what might come next. Marcus found David in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the carpet with his homework spread in careful patterns around him. Braille textbooks to his left, audio recorder to his right, white cane resting across his lap like a bridge between worlds. The afternoon light streaming through their windows caught the texture of raised dots on paper, creating tiny shadows that danced as David's fingers moved across each line. "Dad, I finished my math," David announced without looking up. "Mrs. Patterson said, I'm getting better at word problems." Marcus settled beside his son, watching those careful fingers translate raised dots into meaning. 3 years ago, David had been afraid to leave their apartment. Now he navigated middle school with confidence that amazed teachers and made his father's chest tight with pride. The same transformation Marcus had helped Emma Mitchell achieve in 3 weeks. "That's because you understand patterns," Marcus said, adjusting David's posture slightly. "Math is just another kind of navigation." David's head tilted, the listening pose that meant he was processing more than homework. "Dad, after tonight's meeting, will I still have a dad?" The question hit like a physical blow. Marcus pulled David closer, feeling the rapid heartbeat of a 12-year-old boy whose world had already been shattered once. After the accident that took his mother and his sight, David had spent months convinced that everyone he loved would disappear. "Always," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the way his throat constricted. "No matter what happens tonight, you'll always have me." But even as he said it, Marcus wondered how many promises he could keep if the school board's decision went wrong. The kitchen table had become mission control for their defense. Professional portfolios arranged in chronological order, audio recordings labeled with dates and session objectives, video documentation that proved every technique Marcus had used with Emma Mitchell was standard orientation and mobility training, evidence that would either vindicate him completely or fall on deaf ears that had already chosen sides. "Can I help organize something?" David asked, rising with the fluid grace of someone who'd memorized every inch of their apartment. Marcus handed him a stack of certification letters, watching David's fingers identify each document by texture and paperweight. Official letterhead felt different from copy paper. Embossed seals created raised patterns that fingers could read like Braille. "These feel important," David said, arranging the documents with careful precision. "Are they about your real job?" Marcus's breath caught. His real job had been hidden for 3 years behind a custodian's uniform and a father's need to stay close to his son. Professional expertise disguised as manual labor because it kept him near children who needed help, children whose parents couldn't afford $800 specialists or 6-month waiting lists. "Yes," Marcus said simply, "they're about helping kids like you." Outside, the news vans maintained their vigil. Neighbors still gathered in small groups, pointing and whispering. But inside their apartment, father and son worked together with the quiet efficiency of people who'd learned to trust each other completely. David's homework routine had become a meditation on independence, audiobooks that taught navigation by sound, Braille practice that strengthened fingers and built confidence, mobility exercises that turned their living room into a training ground for real-world challenges. The same exercises Marcus had adapted for Emma Mitchell, scaled down for an 8-year-old girl who'd been afraid to walk across a room alone. "Dad," David said, running his fingers across a professional certificate, "why didn't you tell people about these papers before?" Marcus watched his son trace the embossed seal of the Academy for Certification of Vision Rehabilitation Therapy Professionals, the credential that proved he wasn't a custodian who'd overstepped boundaries, but a specialist who'd chosen to work quietly among children who needed help most. "Sometimes helping is more important than explaining," Marcus said, but tonight, explanation would determine everything. The doorbell rang at 4:47 p.m., an unexpected sound that made both father and son freeze. Marcus opened the door to find Mrs. Chen from next door, holding a covered casserole dish and wearing the expression of someone who'd made a difficult decision. "I brought dinner," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "And I wanted you to know, I've been watching you with David for 3 years. Whatever they're saying on TV, it's not the man I see every morning helping his son be brave." David appeared in the doorway, white cane in hand, his face brightening at the familiar voice. "Mrs. Chen, did you bring your grandson's audiobooks?" "Of course, sweetheart," she said, her voice softening as she handed David a small bag. "And I brought something else." She pulled an envelope from her purse, handwritten, sealed, with school board written across the front. "My letter," she explained to Marcus, "about what kind of father you really are." Marcus accepted the envelope with hands that trembled for the first time in 3 days. One neighbor's testimony, one small crack in the wall of community judgment. But cracks could become breaks, and breaks could become freedom. "Thank you," he whispered. Mrs. Chen squeezed his shoulder before leaving. "Some of us remember what truth looks like." 2 hours until the school board meeting. 2 hours until Marcus Chen, custodian, revealed himself as someone else entirely. 2 hours until David learned whether quiet heroes could survive in a world that demanded loud explanations. Marcus looked at his son, surrounded by evidence of professional expertise and letters of support, and realized something profound. He'd been preparing for this moment his entire career. Tonight, David would see his father exactly as he was, not just a custodian, but a certified specialist who'd spent 3 years helping children find their way through darkness. The only question was whether the world was ready to see it too. But Detective Rodriguez was already finding cracks in the perfect accusation. The investigation file on her desk told 2 different stories. Sarah Mitchell's statement painted Marcus Chen as a predator who'd exploited a vulnerable child, but the timeline didn't match the evidence, and 23 years in law enforcement had taught Detective Rodriguez that truth lived in the details everyone forgot to fabricate. Security footage from Riverside Elementary showed Marcus Chen entering the school building at 7:42 a.m. every day for 3 years. Clean record, background check clear, employment history consistent. But the inconsistencies weren't in his story. They were in the accusations against him. The alleged incidents occurred during afternoon hours, Rodriguez noted in her preliminary report, but subject's custodial schedule places him in different building sections during reported timeframes. The timestamps didn't lie, even when people did. Emma Mitchell's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez Santos, had been interviewed twice. Her statements grew more uncertain each time. Emma seemed happier lately, she'd admitted, more confident. She was navigating the hallway independently for the first time since enrollment. Behavioral improvement following alleged trauma violated every pattern Detective Rodriguez knew. Her phone buzzed with another call from Channel 7. "Detective, any comment on the state licensing board investigation?" "No comment," Rodriguez replied, but privately she wondered why a custodian would have professional licenses worth investigating. The pieces didn't fit the crime, but they might fit something else entirely. At Innovate Solutions, the IPO committee call had been moved to 5:00 p.m., 1 hour before the school board meeting. Sarah's hands trembled as she dialed into the conference line, knowing that investor confidence hung by threads that frayed with each news cycle. "Sarah, we need clarity," Goldman Sachs Managing Director Jonathan Myers said without preamble. "The board meeting tonight will either resolve this situation or require us to postpone the IPO indefinitely." $2 billion in valuations balanced on the edge of a decision Sarah wasn't sure she'd made correctly. Outside her office window, the city spread like a circuit board, each building connected to the next in patterns she'd learned to read. Unlike the pattern of evidence that suggested she might have destroyed an innocent man's life. "I understand," Sarah said, though she understood nothing except that protecting Emma had somehow created more danger than safety. The private investigator's envelope remained unopened on her desk, its contents waiting like a sealed verdict. 3 days of investigation into Marcus Chen's background, education records, employment history, professional qualifications that might explain techniques no custodian should know. But looking meant admitting doubt about the accusations that had destroyed his reputation and threatened her company's future. The irony was suffocating. She'd demanded the investigation that might prove her wrong. Dr. Patricia Williams' report arrived via encrypted email at 4:23 p.m., marked Urgent, Professional Concerns. Sarah's cursor hovered over the attachment like a finger on a trigger she wasn't ready to pull. The subject line read, Emma Mitchell, Advanced Techniques Observed. Emma appeared in Sarah's office doorway, white cane folded in hands that moved with growing confidence. "Mommy, when can I practice audio landmarks again? Mr. James said walls have voices if you listen right." Audio landmarks, technical terminology that expensive specialists used after years of training. The same terminology that suggested Marcus Chen knew things no custodian should know, unless he wasn't really a custodian at all. "We'll see, sweetheart," Sarah said, her voice tight with uncertainty that grew stronger each day. But Emma's question contained an assumption that terrified her mother, that Marcus Chen had been teaching professional techniques, not grooming behaviors, that every accusation might be built on a foundation of ignorance rather than evidence. Across the city, news vans repositioned themselves outside Riverside Elementary School. The board meeting had drawn national attention. Cable news crews, parent advocacy groups, disability rights organizations that wanted answers about how a custodian had achieved results that certified specialists couldn't match. The story was growing beyond local scandal into something that demanded explanations Sarah wasn't sure she could provide. Channel 12's investigative team had started asking uncomfortable questions. How did Marcus Chen learn advanced mobility techniques? And what qualifications does he actually possess? The same questions that should have been asked before accusations destroyed his life. But investigative reporting moved slower than mob justice, and truth arrived after verdicts were rendered in the court of public opinion. Marcus's apartment had become a staging ground for systematic defense. Professional portfolios arranged by relevance, audio recordings cued by importance, documentation that would either vindicate him completely or prove that expertise meant nothing against emotional testimony. David helped organize evidence with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to trust his father's preparation. "Dad, this certificate has really fancy paper. It feels important." Marcus looked at the document in his son's hands. his master's degree from San Francisco State University, concentration in orientation and mobility for children with visual impairments. The credential that explained every technique he'd used with Emma Mitchell and proved that appropriate training could achieve remarkable results. Results that looked suspicious only to people who didn't understand the science behind them. "It is important," Marcus said quietly. "It's about helping kids like you and Emma." Outside, protesters maintained their vigil with signs demanding justice for predators they'd convicted without trial. Inside, father and son prepared evidence that would either shatter assumptions or fall on ears that had already stopped listening. Detective Rodriguez closed her investigation file at 5:47 p.m., her preliminary findings clear. No evidence of criminal behavior. Inconsistencies in timeline and behavioral patterns suggest alternative explanation required. But police investigations moved through official channels while public trials proceeded at the speed of social media. Truth had its own timeline, and it rarely synchronized with justice. 1 hour until the school board meeting that would determine everything. 1 hour until Marcus Chen stopped being a custodian accused of crimes and became something else entirely. If anyone was willing to listen. The investigation had found cracks in the perfect accusation, but would those cracks be enough to break through a wall of predetermined guilt? Or would the truth finally shatter everything? Riverside Elementary's auditorium hadn't seen crowds like this since the Christmas pageant 3 years ago, but tonight's gathering carried none of that joy. Every seat filled with parents clutching phones like weapons, recording everything for social media trials that had already rendered their verdicts. Media crews lined the back wall, cameras focused on the podium where Marcus Chen would either defend himself or destroy what remained of his reputation. The live stream counter in the corner of Channel 7's coverage climbed past 15,000 viewers. School safety trending nationally. Comments flooding in faster than moderators could process them, most demanding justice before hearing evidence. Sarah Mitchell sat in the front row, her attorney beside her with legal briefs arranged like ammunition. Behind them, Emma held her folded white cane, head tilted toward sounds that carried more information than most people realized. The auditorium's acoustics created echoes that mapped the room's dimensions, something Emma now understood because Marcus Chen had taught her to listen. School board chair Patricia Hendricks called the emergency session to order at exactly 7 p.m., her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd handled countless crises, but never one with this much media attention. "We're here to address allegations concerning Marcus Chen, custodial staff member accused of inappropriate conduct with a student. Mr. Chen has requested permission to address the board and community." A murmur rippled through the auditorium like wind through wheat. Marcus sat in the third row, professional portfolio on his lap, hands steady despite everything. David beside him, white cane resting against his chair, listening to the crowd with the careful attention their father had taught him. "Before we begin," Hendricks continued, "I want to remind everyone that this is a fact-finding session, not a trial. We'll hear from all parties before making decisions." But the crowd had already decided. Signs reading "Protect Our Children" and "Zero Tolerance" decorated the room like jury instructions. Sarah approached the podium first, her heels clicking against the wooden stage with the precision of someone who delivered countless presentations to investors and boardrooms. But this audience wanted emotion, not facts, and she'd prepared accordingly. "My daughter Emma is 8 years old," Sarah began, her voice carrying the controlled fury of a protective mother. "She's blind, vulnerable, dependent on adults for guidance and safety. When I learned that a school employee was providing unsupervised physical contact under the guise of mobility training, I did what any mother would do. I reported it immediately." She gestured toward Emma, who sat silent and still, confusion evident in her posture. Emma trusted this man. She looked forward to their sessions, but trust can be manipulated, especially in children who can't see what's happening to them. The crowd murmured approval. Phones captured every word. Social media amplified the narrative that had already crystallized: protective mother versus predatory custodian. The techniques he used involved physical guidance, hand placement, and isolated instruction sessions that violated every appropriate boundary. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each accusation. No custodian should possess the kind of specialized knowledge that Marcus Chen demonstrated. But even as she spoke, doubt crept into her voice, because the last sentence contained an assumption that terrified her. What if Marcus Chen's specialized knowledge came from legitimate training rather than predatory intent? Emma's head tilted slightly, recognizing technical terms her mother was using, terms that matched what Mr. James had taught her about navigation and independence. Sarah's presentation lasted 12 minutes. 12 minutes of accusations that painted Marcus Chen as a predator who'd exploited a vulnerable child's trust. When she finished, the auditorium erupted in supportive applause that felt like a verdict. But Marcus Chen rose from his seat with the calm confidence of someone who'd been waiting 3 years for this moment. "Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell," he said, approaching the podium with the measured steps of someone who understood exactly where he was going. "And thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain who I really am." He opened his professional portfolio, removing documents that caught the auditorium's lighting like evidence in a courtroom drama. "My name is Marcus Chen, and for the past 3 years, I've worked as a custodian at Riverside Elementary. But that's not who I am." The crowd quieted, sensing a shift in narrative that nobody had expected. "I hold a master's degree in orientation and mobility from San Francisco State University," Marcus continued, holding up his diploma for the cameras to capture. "I'm certified by the Academy for Certification of Vision Rehabilitation Therapy Professionals. I've spent 15 years helping children with visual impairments achieve independence." Sarah's breath caught. The private investigator's envelope on her desk suddenly felt like evidence she'd been too afraid to examine. "Every technique I used with Emma Mitchell is standard orientation and mobility training," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "Sound mapping, audio landmark identification, systematic desensitization to new environments. These aren't grooming behaviors. They're professional interventions that cost $800 per session from private specialists. With prior written consent from Emma's legal guardian and the district council present, we'll play a 30-second excerpt." He pressed a button on the audio recorder in his hand. Emma's voice filled the auditorium, bright with excitement and discovery. "Mr. James, I can hear the corner. The sound bounces different when there's a wall coming up." "That's right, Emma. Now try counting your steps to the water fountain." 1, 2, 3. I can hear it humming. 4, 5, 6. I did it. I found it by myself." The pure joy in Emma's voice as she achieved independence for the first time silenced the auditorium completely. This wasn't the sound of trauma or manipulation. It was the sound of breakthrough. Emma's eyes filled with tears she couldn't wipe away fast enough. Sarah's hands trembled as she realized what she'd been hearing. Professional documentation of her daughter's progress, recorded by someone who understood exactly what he was doing. Marcus clicked to another recording. This one, Emma teaching another child. "You have to listen for the echo." Emma's voice explained with newfound confidence. "Mr. James says walls talk if you know their language. Here, try walking toward the sound." With the district's council present and under a preservation request, we're displaying a legally exported time-stamped clip, hash on file, with the guardian's written consent. The auditorium watched as Marcus displayed security footage on the projection screen, time-stamped video showing his sessions with Emma, professional positioning, appropriate boundaries, systematic instruction that followed textbook protocols for orientation and mobility training. "The cameras captured everything," Marcus said quietly. "Not predator behavior, but professional intervention that gave Emma the independence her mother's money couldn't buy." Sarah stared at the screen, watching her daughter transform from fearful dependence to confident navigation under the guidance of someone who clearly knew exactly what he was doing. The crowd had fallen completely silent, the weight of misunderstanding settling like dust after an explosion. "I chose to work as a custodian," Marcus continued, "because it kept me close to children who needed help but couldn't afford private specialists. Children whose school districts couldn't provide adequate services. Children like my son David, who taught me that the right intervention at the right time can change everything." He gestured toward David, who rose with his white cane and navigated to the stage with confidence that proved every word his father had spoken. "Mrs. Mitchell," Marcus said, looking directly at Sarah, "you were protecting your daughter from the wrong thing. The real danger wasn't my training. It was Emma's isolation and dependence." Sarah stood slowly, the weight of 3 days' accusations crushing down like a collapsed building. The private investigator's report, the security footage, the recordings of her daughter's breakthrough. All evidence that she'd destroyed an innocent man's life while trying to protect her child from someone who'd actually helped her grow. Sarah's voice broke, carrying the weight of apologies that could never undo the damage she'd caused. I was wrong. About everything. The auditorium erupted, not in judgment this time, but in collective shame as a community realized they'd participated in destroying someone who dedicated his life to helping their children. But Marcus Chen wasn't finished yet. "This isn't about my vindication," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd's murmur. "It's about Emma and David and every child in this district who deserves proper adaptive services. It's about building something better." The same community that had destroyed him now sat in stunned silence, waiting to learn what justice looked like when the victim became the teacher, and the lesson was about to begin. School Board Chair Patricia Hendricks called for a 5-minute recess, but nobody moved. The auditorium remained frozen in collective shame as parents stared at phones that had spread accusations faster than truth could follow. The same devices that had amplified judgment now carried the weight of complicity in destroying an innocent man's reputation. Board member Dr. James Martinez was the first to speak when proceedings resumed. "Mr. Chen, on behalf of this district, I offer our sincerest apologies for the failure to verify your credentials before accepting accusations at face value. This represents a catastrophic breakdown in our due process procedures." But Marcus raised his hand, stopping the formal apology that felt too small for the damage done. "Dr. Martinez, apologies won't help the next qualified professional who chooses to work quietly among children who need help. What will you do differently?" The question hung in the air like a challenge that demanded institutional change, not just personal regret. Sarah Mitchell approached the podium again, her legal brief forgotten, her attorney's objections ignored. The woman who'd demanded justice 3 days ago now faced a different kind of reckoning. "I destroyed a man's life," she said, her voice carrying no trace of the corporate confidence that had built a tech empire. "I turned a community against someone who was helping my daughter achieve what 6 months of expensive therapy couldn't accomplish, and I did it because I was afraid of trusting another man with Emma's care." She looked directly at Marcus, tears streaming down her face in front of cameras that captured every moment. "My ex-husband abandoned us when Emma was diagnosed. I swore no man would hurt her again, but my protection became paranoia, and my paranoia nearly destroyed the one person who was actually helping her grow." The confession landed like a stone in still water, ripples of understanding spreading through an audience that had participated in the same rush to judgment. Board member Susan Chen Williams, no relation to Marcus, pulled out her phone and began reading from the district's social media feeds. Over 4,000 posts demanding Mr. Chen's termination, 1,200 signatures on a petition to ban him permanently, 47 news articles calling him a predator, 0 attempts to verify his professional qualifications. She looked up from her screen with the expression of someone counting casualties. "We failed not just Mr. Chen, but every child in this district who deserves proper adaptive services from qualified professionals." The vote came swift and unanimous. Marcus Chen reinstated immediately with full back pay, formal apology entered into public record, and a mandate to investigate how a certified specialist had been employed as a custodian for 3 years without anyone recognizing his qualifications. But Marcus requested the microphone again because vindication was only the beginning. "The real failure here wasn't bureaucratic," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned the right to teach hard lessons. "It was moral. This community chose fear over facts, emotion over evidence, judgment over justice." He gestured toward the crowd that had gathered with torches and pitchforks just 3 days ago. "You shared posts without reading them. You signed petitions without investigating claims. You convicted someone based on accusations that a single phone call could have disproven." The silence grew uncomfortable as parents realized they'd participated in digital mob justice that destroyed reputations faster than truth could be assembled. Detective Rodriguez stood from her seat in the back row, her preliminary investigation report in hand. For the record, Mr. Chen's background check revealed no criminal history. His employment record showed exemplary service, and his professional credentials explain every technique witnesses observed. The investigation found no evidence of inappropriate conduct. She paused, letting the weight of official vindication settle. However, the investigation did reveal a serious problem with how this community processes accusations involving children. Fear overruled fact-checking at every level. Local Channel 7 reporter Jessica Kim, who'd broken the original story, requested permission to speak. Her face carried the expression of someone who'd learned journalism's hardest lesson about the difference between breaking news and breaking lives. "I reported allegations without verifying credentials," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I prioritized speed over accuracy, and I contributed to destroying an innocent man's reputation. This is not journalism, it's digital lynching." Her confession triggered a cascade of accountability. Parents who'd shared the story without reading it, school officials who'd suspended without investigating, community members who'd crossed streets to avoid someone they'd never bothered to actually know. But Marcus Chen had one more lesson to teach. "The damage is done," he said, pulling up social media feeds on his phone. "These accusations will follow me forever. Every Google search of my name will include words like predator and inappropriate conduct. My son will grow up knowing his father was publicly branded as something he never was." David stood beside his father, white cane in hand, his young face carrying wisdom that 12-year-olds shouldn't need to possess. "But Dad, now everyone knows who you really are." The simple truth from a blind child silenced an auditorium full of adults who'd forgotten how to see clearly. Marcus nodded, his voice softening as he looked at his son. "You're right, David. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the best things we can do for others." He turned back to the crowd, his final words carrying the weight of someone who'd transformed victimhood into victory. "I forgive this community for what you did to me, but I won't forget what you did to my son, or what you almost did to Emma's progress. And I won't let it happen to the next qualified professional who chooses to help children quietly." The applause began slowly. First from Dr. Patricia Williams, the expensive specialist who'd watched Marcus achieve in 3 weeks what she couldn't accomplish in 6 months. Then from parents whose children had special needs. Then from the disability rights advocates who'd driven from 3 states away to witness this moment. Finally, the entire auditorium stood in ovation that felt more like penance than celebration, honoring someone they'd tried to destroy for helping their children achieve independence. But the real justice wouldn't come from applause or apologies. It would come from the institutional changes that prevented the next Marcus Chen from being destroyed by fear that masqueraded as protection. The same crowd that had gathered to condemn him now stood to honor him. But Marcus Chen was already planning something that would transform their shame into lasting change. Justice wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about building a system where qualified help could be recognized instead of criminalized, where children's needs mattered more than parents' fears, where truth moved faster than accusations. The lesson was over, but the real work was just beginning, and it started with a conversation that would change everything for children across the district. Sarah Mitchell waited in the school parking lot as the auditorium emptied, her corporate confidence replaced by something more fragile and genuine. The IPO committee call had been postponed indefinitely, but standing under fluorescent lights with her daughter, Sarah realized some things mattered more than stock valuations. Emma held her white cane with the confidence Marcus had taught her, navigating around puddles and obstacles with skills that 6 months of expensive therapy hadn't achieved. Each confident step represented a breakthrough that Sarah had almost destroyed through misguided protection. "Mr. Chen," Sarah called as Marcus and David approached their car. Could we talk?" Marcus paused, studying the woman who'd branded him a predator 72 hours ago. David squeezed his father's hand, the gesture carrying trust that had never wavered, despite everything. "Emma wants to show you something," Sarah continued, her voice carrying none of the corporate authority that had built a tech empire. "She's been practicing the techniques you taught her." Emma stepped forward, unfolding her white cane with the precision of someone who'd learned confidence through proper instruction. "Mr. Chen, I can find the car now. Want to see?" She began moving across the parking lot, tapping patterns that mapped the space around her. Left turn at the concrete barrier, straight path between parked cars. Audio landmarks that helped her navigate independently through an environment that had once terrified her. Marcus watched his former student demonstrate mastery that proved every technique, vindicated every method, justified every risk he'd taken to help her grow. "She's been asking about you every day," Sarah said quietly, not as someone who hurt her, but as someone who helped her discover she was braver than she knew. The irony was perfect. The child at the center of the accusations had never stopped believing in the man her mother had tried to destroy. Mrs. Mitchell, Marcus said, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone who understood that healing took time. Emma achieved this progress because she was ready to learn, not because I'm magic. Any qualified professional could have helped her reach this level. But you were the only one who did, Sarah replied. The expensive specialist focused on limitations. You taught her possibilities. David moved to Emma's side, his own white cane creating gentle rhythms that harmonized with hers. Two children who'd learned independence through proper training, now demonstrating techniques that transformed disability into different ability. Dad, David said, looking up at his father with pride that filled Marcus's chest with warmth. Emma's really good at sound mapping now. She had a good teacher's assistant, Marcus replied, watching his son share navigation tips with the girl whose accusations had nearly destroyed their family. But Sarah Mitchell hadn't approached them for pleasantries. The woman who'd built a technology company worth $2 billion had come with a proposition that would transform their shared tragedy into systematic change. I want to make this right, Sarah said, pulling out her phone to show architectural plans she'd commissioned that afternoon. The Chen Mitchell Adaptive Mobility Learning Center, a facility where children with visual impairments can receive proper orientation and mobility training from certified professionals. Marcus studied the blueprints with growing amazement. Specialized training rooms, audio landmark systems, equipment for systematic skill development, everything needed to provide children across the district with services that parents couldn't afford and schools couldn't adequately provide. Full funding through Innovate Solutions, Sarah continued. Professional staff salaries that attract qualified specialists, and a director position that comes with the respect and recognition your expertise deserves. The offer was more than vindication. It was transformation of injustice into institutional change that would help hundreds of children achieve independence. But Marcus looked at David, reading his son's expression with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to interpret subtle cues. What do you think, buddy? David's smile was brighter than the parking lot lights. Will there be other kids like us? Lots of them, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion as he realized what Sarah was offering. Not just a job, but a mission that would prevent other children from struggling alone, other parents from fighting systems that didn't understand their needs. And Emma can come learn with me? David asked, his question carrying the simple wisdom of someone who understood that shared challenges became shared strengths. Emma moved closer, her confidence evident in every step. I want to help teach other kids too. Mr. Chen showed me that being blind doesn't mean being helpless. Marcus looked at Sarah, seeing not the CEO who'd tried to destroy him, but a mother who'd learned the difference between protection and paranoia, between fear and genuine safety. The district has already approved the partnership, Sarah said, anticipating his questions. Board unanimous vote, community support, and a waiting list of over 200 children whose parents want proper adaptive services. The number represented more than demand. It represented years of unmet needs, children struggling without proper intervention, families fighting systems that couldn't provide adequate help. Marcus extended his hand to Sarah, the gesture carrying forgiveness that had been earned through genuine change rather than demanded through apology. Partners, he said simply. Partners, Sarah agreed, her handshake carrying the firmness of someone who'd learned that some investments couldn't be measured in stock prices. 6 months later, the Chen Mitchell Adaptive Mobility Learning Center opened its doors to children across 3 school districts. Marcus Chen, Director of Adaptive Services, arrived each morning at 7:30 a.m., no longer disguised as a custodian, but recognized as the certified professional he'd always been. David and Emma served as peer mentors, teaching younger children that blindness meant different navigation, not different dreams. Their friendship had become proof that shared challenges created unbreakable bonds. Sarah Mitchell's IPO proceeded successfully, 8 months delayed, but investors were impressed by the company's commitment to community service and adaptive technology development. Stock prices recovered fully within a year, proving that doing right sometimes aligned with doing well. The viral video that destroyed Marcus's reputation was replaced by viral videos of children achieving independence through proper training. Adaptive mobility trended as a celebration rather than accusation, showing the power of social media to rebuild what it had torn down. But the most important change was invisible. a community that had learned to verify before vilifying, to investigate before condemning, to protect children through expertise rather than emotion. Detective Rodriguez closed her file on the Marcus Chen case with a notation that became standard procedure. Allegations involving specialized skills require verification of accuser and accused qualifications before public statements. Mrs. Chen from next door continued bringing casseroles, but now they were celebrations rather than comfort food. Her grandson joined the center's program, learning navigation skills that no school had been able to provide. On quiet mornings before the center opened, Marcus and David still practiced navigation patterns in their apartment, not because they needed to, but because some routines were too precious to abandon. The sound of white canes tapping against familiar floors remained their shared meditation on how far they'd traveled together. The truth had finally found its voice, and it spoke in the confident footsteps of children who'd learned that the right guidance could transform any darkness into navigation toward light. Some stories end with justice, others end with change. The best ones end with both.